So another panel, and a real opportunity, I think, for us to kind of reflect on the full day. Of course, we will have a good opportunity to kind of look and talk about those last two presentations that we've just received, both of which were absolutely brilliant. Thank you, James. Thank you, Karen. But I'm also conscious that you might have some things to add from the rest of the day if you had the opportunity, and indeed we'll kind of follow the same format as we did earlier on. But before we get going, I'd love to introduce our panel of panellists, or indeed actually even ask you to introduce yourself. So Louise, can we start with you, and then we'll work our way down.
So Louise Douglas, I'm the Director of Security Strategy and Culture at KPMG, so cover awareness and human risk management, policy and technology risk as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Kimberley Graham and I manage people-centred security at Sage, a large tech company based in the northeast of England, and our remit is around internal comms, phishing simulation, security upskilling, those kind of things.
Hi everyone. So Ashon, I feel like I've got the very odd title out of everyone on this panel. So I'm an ex-FTSE 250 global CISO multiple times, ran human risk and behaviour change programs starting 7 years ago. So feel like I was somewhat trying to kick the industry into action on this. Great to hear everyone's thoughts on that. I'm currently now VP of strategy for Cyera, so we're looking at everything sort of data security and AI. But yeah, really excited to be here.
I'm Emma W. I'm currently head of cyber essentials at NCSC, but I've worked at NCSC for a long time looking in socio-technical security and people-centred security.
Amazing, amazing. So a real range of practitioner experience and a real range of current focuses as well, actually, in that sense. So fantastic to have you all on the panel today. I think I'll start where we kind of just left off, if that's okay. It was brilliant to hear both from well, actually, in all cases, everything we've done so far, but literally just as we kind of wrapped up there with Karen, and the issue of insider threat. In many ways, a bit obvious that there are lots of different types of insider, but the truth is that I would suggest that many people who are responsible for security awareness, managing human risk, thinking about security culture in their organizations are increasingly being asked to think about how we address insiders. So maybe, I guess, the question to the panel is, what experience do you have of, indeed, this kind of focus on insider, and how do you think about it? And was there anything that you just heard now that kind of makes you think slightly differently? Can we start with you, Louise?
Yeah, I thought the taxonomy was incredibly helpful, and I think most people in the sort of human people-centred security space are managing accidental insiders every day. That's why we exist, and it is a risk management function. I think it's increasingly seen as a risk management function. I think the malicious insider is a slightly different piece, but there are some synergies there too, and I think, you know, more and more as behavioural science comes into the sort of human risk space and things like that, I think it grows more opportunity to broaden the scope of what sits within what was traditionally awareness and education.
Yeah, certainly. I'd say building on that, we run the Insider Risk Programme, and we definitely make sure we collaborate across the company. So it's not just a IT or a security issue, it's to do with HR. We bring all the product teams in as well. So I feel like, yeah, there's lots of opportunity for collaboration. That's a key part of it.
As you've kind of looked at this from a variety of different perspectives, but one of those relatively recently is as a CISO who is thinking about a variety of different things. Insider is just one of them. So what are your kind of thoughts on this issue of insider and the different types of insider, and really where, I guess, the question that most of the people in this audience who are thinking about security awareness, managing human risk, but increasingly being asked to think about insider and what can be done about that?
So I think our industry has done a bad job in architecting the way we think about threats in terms of what actually causes loss in organisations. I can say from all of the years that I've led security functions and everyone I know who's a CISO across the industry, that pretty much 95% of your loss exposure is generated accidentally. Okay, it's not generated from adversaries. Those events are at the tail end of a distribution, and they happen once every 10 years or 5 years or whatever. But the human risks label is great because it has step changed the way we think about things. But I much prefer behaviour change, and I'll give you a very brief example why. I spent most of my career in quantitative risk modelling beforehand, and so when I look at calculating actually how much money we lose, most security functions have basically two things to manage: their capital expenditure and their operational expenditure. I would look at risk of basically any single dollar or pound that we would lose where we could have not lost it. And what I mean by that is like in literally every bit of operational efficiency. So when it comes to behavior change, I used to run exercises where I would measure and quantify how much money we were losing in responding to incidents because staff across the business didn't know who to go to, they didn't know who to communicate with, they didn't know how to get messages out quickly enough. I lost in one of my last data breaches £250,000 on average from my SOC staff having to expend time recrafting messages to the right people because they didn't have that taxonomy, that catalogue of names, addresses to go to straight away. We fixed that problem. That's £250,000, pounds back to the business in revenue opportunity growth. And for me, driving these programs as my thinking's evolved over time, that was what I was kind of going after, right? My job is to run security as effectively but as cheaply as possible. That's what the boards want to hear. And actually, it was mentioned earlier, because I think it's a really great point, that by not doing some of these things, I mean, I stopped phishing simulations years ago, except when the regulator got in, and that's a separate discussion maybe we could come on to. I would love your perspective on that particularly as well in NCSC. But by not doing it, we actually inculcated a natural culture shift, a cultural change across the business where people felt like, well, the SOC isn't just this basement, where people are stuck in looking at attack screens. They are a business function critical to revenue generation and solvency in the business. And I tried to do that for every single technical function. There was not one aspect of security where we would want them hidden away or not feeling that they're supporting client services, supporting the CFO, supporting shareholders and clients. And that began to really step change the way technology was perceived as previously a bottomless cost center, like a well of just cost, into an investment function that was supporting the business growing. And that tended to yield better results, I think.
Well, we'll come back to some of the things that you said there, Ash, because I do think that you touched on something that I suspect many people in the room are trying to work out how they do as well, how they kind of transform that perception of the function. So that's really, really helpful. Emma.
That's great. That's music to my ears, everything you just said about framing security as an area that adds business value, that isn't a cost or a liability or drain on resources, but something that actually adds opportunity and adds value and adds efficiency and adds all the things that we care about more widely in the organisation. And so key to that is evidence about being able to prove the value of what you're doing, especially if you can make it come out as an improvement to the bottom line. Though it's always interesting to me that people's interest in evidence seems to end at certain particular points. Like if you say, right, so you're very keen on phishing simulations. Okay, tell me why. Lay out why this works for you. Tell me why you think this works for your organisation. Show me in numbers or graphs or whatever you have about why this is a worthwhile intervention that reduces risk or reduces cost or whatever measure you can say. And amazingly, no one has ever done this to my satisfaction. Sometimes you go, but the seniors say we've got to do it. Why do the seniors say you've got to do it? Because it just kind of feels right. They say, we have to do something, this is something, therefore we are doing this. And the other aspect is that compliance thing that we've touched on, that they say you have to do something about phishing or you have to do some kind of security education and awareness. Again, this is a thing, so you can do this. And many phishing simulations come kind of off-the-shelf packages. So if you're a poor, overworked, under-resourced security education awareness person, you don't have a lot of time or budget to do anything creative. So you grab something that's available, you do it, you put a tick in the box. I don't blame anyone who's in that situation, but you're absolutely right. We have to do better than that as an industry. Finally, I'm going to go against the flow and say I've never liked that term, managing human risk. It's a negative framing, right? It reminds people, first of all, that we are looking at humans as a source of risk and as a liability, rather than actually the only thing that creates value in our organisation. There's no organisations without people. No company does anything good without people. And I just worry that by coming at it from a risk-first perspective, we're sort of undermining that value and encouraging people to see people as a negative force rather than, as I say, the positive force that they really can be if we allow it.
I love it. I love it. I love this debate and I love this conversation, and it's one that continues and will go because I think it is very important. I think you're right to kind of talk about the fact that lots and lots of people have an issue with the framing and the language. I will at some point explain to you why I think that we're missing something here, because human risk is not about humans as the risk, but the risk associated with it. We don't think of financial risk and then think that finance is bad. We think that there's a risk associated with finance, but for some reason what we can't deny is we do connect human risk in a very different way. So interesting one, and one we should definitely explore further. So here's an interesting point to me. James talks about phishing, and he talked about the social context around it. He even gave us an example of kind of another way to make the point about phishing, the kind of idea of using demonstrations, interactive demonstrations. And of course, we've kind of spent a fair bit of time and did a good chunk of Karen's talk, again, talking about another way, phishing simulations. Phishing is clearly not just a major challenge and a major issue, but a real focus for those of us who are thinking about the human aspect of cybersecurity. So I guess, where is the opportunity from a research perspective? I guess, you know, if you're to kind of be able to wave a magic wand and point hundreds, if not thousands, of really quite bright people at the things that you're trying to answer as a practitioner, as a security leader, as a security policy maker who's looking at lots of different things, what is it we might be pointing at? What is the kind of the day-to-day problem, or indeed set of day-to-day problems that you would think about when you just think, gosh, if I was to just point at and think about phishing in my organisation, I wish I knew X?
Well, I'm happy to say that maybe I'm a lone voice, but I'm not the biggest hater of phishing campaigns. I do think there's a place for them and they can be done well. We definitely do our phishing campaigns, actually call them phishing educational campaigns, because it just sits within our larger security awareness program, and we do a lot around educating colleagues on what to spot in phishing and red flags to look out for, and also the next steps of the reporting and what you can do to take action, or is this breaking a process that you know, is someone asking you to take action that you feel uncomfortable with? So I actually feel like there is a place for phishing simulations. Gives you good data as well about who's reporting, who's clicking on things, so then you can get that data and sort of focus in on those teams and bring more education to them. So I don't feel like it's the bogeyman that everyone says it is, really.
So is that to say that you don't have any kind of ideas for further research or questions? I mean, do you, even with access to that as a tool and a technique or a tactic, have any thoughts or questions?
Yeah, actually, just listening to the previous one made me think, well, we have access to Copilot now at work, and I don't know if anyone's actually using sort of generative AI to assess phishing emails. So if you got one, could you sort of copy and paste it and say, is this a phishing email? I don't know if that's something that we've researched into. We have someone putting the hand up, so maybe that's happening.
Not hearing from John anymore today. Anymore today? John, please.
Sorry, can I just say, I've seen some vendor platforms which are actually doing that.
Oh, okay.
They have a chatbot sat next to your inbox, and at any point you can turn to the chatbot and it says, what's your opinion on this?
Right, that's good. Yeah, we're building many internal chatbots, again, using Copilot, mainly just to solve security upskilling questions from colleagues. And one of them I did think, could we make a little chatbot that people could copy and paste internally some potential phishing email and say, like, do you think this is real? Should we contact the security team from there? Just some ideas.
Very interesting. Anybody?
I've got an idea about research. I completed a master's in psychology a couple of years ago, and was quite interested in the cyber psychology element. So I think this sort of transfers to psychology and cyber research. A lot of the research that's out there that says why someone is susceptible to phishing is conflicting. So I've seen research saying women are more susceptible than men more than women, older people, younger people, this personality trait, that personality trait. And I'm thinking about Karen's presentation about the disempowered. I've always thought it would be a really, really empowering piece of research if we could create almost a framework of different traits and characteristics that when them work together would act as a predictor of phishing susceptibility, so that an individual could complete that, not an organisation or a corporation, and with that knowledge take action appropriate.
Really interesting. This idea of kind of indicators to predict things is, one, not new to security, and two, laced with all sorts of challenges and, of course, understandable ethical concerns, but yet it is something that many people ask for and indeed talk about. I don't know, does anybody in the audience have any experience of, or indeed just any thoughts on some of the challenges associated with such a tool, a model, or indeed even an idea? Anybody? Ali?
Sorry, you could just stand up. I think there's too many variables. I think that's because we've all tried to do this before. I've talked before about linking risks to the behaviours that impact upon those risks. But the problem with phishing is that there are just too many variables. The country you're in, the company you're in, the size of your organisation, how much security support you get, whether it's a psychologically safe culture. You know, you have an almost infinite number of variables. So I'm not sure whether a framework for the way that we're describing, just in terms of like gender, level of intelligence, or whatever, you know, I just don't know if it'll ever be feasible. It just feels like it's so many variables. It just feels like it's too big. Yeah. But equally, back to the other point, I know that phishing is still something that many of us have to do, many of us choose to do. And you can slice and dice it in many different ways. It's a way of getting people's attention. And I often find that if you do it well, and I know that Kimberley is doing that, if you do it well, it's a way to start the conversation about all the other things. And I think that's probably, for me, is one of the most valuable things about phishing now. Thanks, Ali. It's really, really helpful. Another thing that kind of connected the two talks there was this idea of fear-based engagement and the danger with it. Emma, I know that you have written and thought extensively about some of the challenges associated with that approach, and also moving en masse, I mean, nationally, trying to get people to move away from this. Emma, help us with that, given that you also know that many organisations, they've got to do something. Consequence management will mean a lot as a term to many of you in the room when you think about ultimately where you go. That kind of juxtaposition between, we don't want to use fear, but at the same time, we can't just let this thing happen and keep going, and where do we stop? What do you think as you hear that, and whether it's Karen or indeed James in their research?
Yeah, really interesting. And because it's something I've thought about a lot and was really interested to see Karen's take on it today. I think so much of our usage of fear comes from a sort of automatically grabbing a lever that we know works. We know you can always get through to people on that level. We know you can make them afraid really quite easily. So we're grabbing a lever that works to get their attention, and then we don't know what to do with that lever. So we don't sort of do the equation that I've devised and always got in my head, and which is what I've got NCSC comms to use with quite a lot of success. To say, right, first of all, you do have to get people's attention, right? You have to tell them about the threat, because if they don't know about the threat, they won't be motivated to act. That doesn't mean you can just use fear with impunity. You've got to be a bit smarter about getting your message across. And one criticism, I think, which is very well placed in cybersecurity, is that we overuse threat information. We overblow the threat a great deal. Make people think that attackers are out to get them every single moment of every day, on the assumption that, if we get their attention, they'll be really motivated. As Karen says, no, fear doesn't really work that way. If you overdo it, people will put their heads in the sand and they will not listen to anything you say. They don't want to feel bad. No one wants to feel bad. So yes, you have to get their attention by talking about the threat, but you have to do it in a way that is measured, that is relevant to them, so that they can see themselves in it. And then you have to couple that threat information with what they can do to protect themselves. So it's this aspect of building confidence and building self-efficacy. So they need to know exactly what to do, and they need to know that what they do makes a difference. If they know all of those things and they know why to do it, there's a much better chance they will act. And when I say they must know what to do, the word I say again and again is actionable, right? Actionable information on what to do. Be careful, that's not actionable. Look out, that's not really actionable. Stay alert, like what 24/7? I mean, I have to sleep. So, so actionable often comes down to measurable. There has to be a way that you can know if you have done it or not. And that's what I try and keep in mind. You can't ever measure if you have been alert enough. There is no specific way to do that. So you can come down to, look for emails with these particular characteristics. And like we've heard, that's got limitations as well. Generally, actionable advice coupled with threat information, coupled with some more general kind of sometimes social encouragement and support to go, you can do this, and it is important that you do this. That really works very well.
Ash, we are, as a community, collectively all particularly interested in the human aspect of cybersecurity. And indeed, I think you'd probably be hard-pushed to find a security professional on the planet who doesn't believe that the human aspect is important in one way, shape or form. But it's clear that the kind of span of perspectives is huge, and the experience that people have is huge. You've had quite a lot of success in changing the way organizations you've been in have thought, but you've also come with a very analytical mind, and indeed have kind of introduced a very analytical approach to many of the places that you work. So I guess, what's the bit of advice that you would give to practitioners in this room who are maybe going to go and have conversations with their CISOs about managing human risk, or security awareness, security culture, educating people, whichever way that they are approaching it? What's the advice that you would give them that would help them maybe be more impactful in the way that security leaders are more likely to care?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't want you all to just watch me think for like 30 minutes on how I can craft a really good answer.
But we're going to anyway.
So the advice to the individual, I mean, look, you get all sorts of CISOs, right? And I think the most successful ones that I've seen have got a healthy balance between IQ and EQ, probably more EQ are the more successful ones, I would say, than anything else, because ultimately you're a business executive. That's the reality, right? And I think you're right in that the way I approached it was trying to just change culture in the business. Not, I wasn't here all day, so I'm conscious what I'm about to say could go against the grain of everything, but I actually don't want my staff having to think like security professionals. I think it's wrong. It's my job, it's my responsibility. It's my last security function was 128 people. All of us were a collective force to make sure that my asset managers were the best asset managers in the world, that my dev team were doing the best form of development. We had a very similar situation there where over time we had this issue where we were trying to get them to remediate vulnerabilities as they were creating code and pushing it through pipeline. And I'm like, yeah, but they don't want to do that. They just want to create code that builds product that gets sold and keeps everyone employed and the business growing. I was like, why should they have to think like that? The gentleman said it earlier perfectly. There are enough technology controls to solve all of those problems. I could work out how to auto-remediate the vulnerabilities through the pipeline. It's the same thing on the human risk side. I think when you actually look from a risk modeling perspective, it's odd because it's almost like the human risk discussions happened in an echo chamber, because it's like I'm taking my entire loss scenario and I'm just obsessing about one aspect of it, when actually I've got, again, defense in depth, 90% of the controls that will actually mitigate the loss, which is what I ultimately care about, to stop that happening. And then we build all these programs, like messing around with the psychology of users in the business. And it's like, yeah, but you could probably just spend like 200K on a product that's going to build in really great conditional access policies that will solve data protection. All of the phishing-led events, and they are, most incidents are phishing-led, that I've been involved in, we've taken away as mistakes internally. It's our fault. We when they got access to a certain file, that shouldn't have been in there. That should have been locked down. That should have been moved to a secure repo. That shouldn't have been internet facing. They shouldn't have been able to move laterally. All of these things are control failures on our part. And I don't think we're, humble's not the right word, but I don't think we are self-deprecating enough to kind of address that. And I think part of the problem is that it's complex to model risk like that. It's just hard work, right? And I think a lot of organizations pay lip service to risk management. It's a very compliance-based, tick box-based approach. Most chief risk officers that I've ever worked with have been chief compliance officers. They wouldn't agree to that, but that is what they do. I have very rarely ever worked, at least in my organization, for someone who's genuinely thought about risk in sense of cost-benefit analysis, right? And ultimately, when it comes to my users, like I said, we actually reduced loss exposure more by helping them get to an audience quicker in certain scenarios, or we had actually like 3 phishing reporting buttons. That's a major problem as well, duplication. So, I had one on Mimecast, one on Tessia, and I had one on Outlook. And I was like, well, let's just get rid of all of those and have a single interface for them. That was, again, helping the efficiency of the end user. When I still do my corporate training nowadays, and don't tell Cyera this, I still try and skip it as quickly as possible. I mute it. I have 3 screens. I've got much more important stuff to be doing. Now, arguably, I've spent my career in that field, so, I kind of touch wood, sort of know what I'm doing. But like, that is the way people work and act. And the point around variables is spot on, right? You know, you'd have a bad day with traffic. You had, you know, you've got kids, you know, the dog needs to go to the vet, you know, all of these things that you have to deal with and contend with. You know, by the time you get to your desk, and it only takes like one wrong thing. I also would get hit by these emails, right? Like, how the hell am I meant to look for a Cyrillic A or something in an email nowadays and to prevent it? And I'm the global CISO. If I can't do it, there's no way I can expect any end user in the business to do it. So I think one of the areas I would like to see in research, just to tangentially bring it back to that point, is, and you know, I think Emma mentioned this around like threats and stuff. I would love to see a piece of research invested where phishing was not treated in isolation of its own activity, but treated as part of a broader set of you know, risk scenarios where it's actually mapping controls against assets, against threats, against vulnerabilities, and to build pictures of what actual loss looks like in businesses. Because every discussion and research paper I've read is completely devoid of that context. And actually, when you're running security functions or a technology function as the CTO or CIO, you know, that is what incidents look like. It's just, it just is. And so that, I think, would be an interesting area.
I think this is brilliant because the reality is, you know, one of the reasons we are here is to not just hear from incredible researchers and research, but of course to maybe ask questions that might become necessarily in the future subjects for amazing research. So really great examples. We've only got a few minutes left, and I'd love us to kind of wrap up with some closing thoughts that maybe help people walk away with kind of things that they might want to continue to mull over later on. So maybe that's the kind of next spot I'm going to put people on, which is just ask you what you might take away from today. You know, what's the thing that you've, or one of the things that you maybe have taken away from today that either you didn't think of or didn't know about before you arrived, or actually, yes, I did, but I hadn't really given it as much thought as I might do now. Louise.
I'm going to take Jason's paper and share it with the rest of my leadership team, because the concept around trauma.
You realise we're not going to hear the end of it.
That's around trauma and PTSD. I'd never thought of actually dealing with an incident in that way, but having worked in policing in a previous role, actually after a goals crisis in policing, you have a debrief, and actually that debrief is to deal with the individual's psychological state. And actually it's got me thinking now, is there much more we can take from the emergency services and actually bring it into how we manage incidents in the future?
Brilliant. Thanks.
Yeah, actually, funny enough, I was in a talk yesterday with the sort of a head of cyber resilience and business continuity, and we were talking about sort of the human side and the human risk for people who are part of these incidents. So actually, same as Jason's. I'd like to get that downloaded, please.
Good. I know that you weren't with us for the whole day.
I was going to say, I feel very embarrassed for admitting earlier that I wasn't here all day.
We're tough that you were able to join us even for a part of it. But just in general, I mean, again, you know, sure. we've spoken a lot. Just keen to hear your thoughts on.
Yeah, I just think, and maybe this is actually a better answer to the terrible answer that I gave earlier on the advice. Like, really engage in discussions around what actually causes the loss at the end of the day for the business, right? Because I think so much of the discussion in the human risk and the phishing space is like a self-licking lollipop. I think it just exists of its own accord for just this kind of like, you know, discussion just to kind of feed itself. And actually, I think the more people that understand the kind of event chains that actually cause harm to businesses, and I don't mean harm in like a red on a tile on a risk matrix or like a high, you know, severity rating. I'm talking about like really understanding how money's leaving the door, whether that's in time per hour of overexpended, you know, energy, or whether it's you know, actually in legal fines and regulatory fines, or it's, you know, maybe maybe care for individuals that we're going to have to pay for post incidents. And I've been in those situations, and you know, I think most security leaders honestly will think of themselves as a psychologist and a parent, and you know, some of the stuff that I dealt with. I mean, I took my first CISO role when I was 28, so I was dealing with divorces, you know, like miscarriages, alcoholism, and you think, oh God, how the hell am I going to run all of this? And I think that psychology aspect's really, really important, but it needs to be part of a broader context, okay? At the end of the day, we're all there to kind of keep the business growing in the right direction, and we don't want phishing to just become a thing in and of itself for the sake of itself, I think.
Thanks, and Emma.
So first of all, everything Jason said today was brilliant. So, No problem.
Some of us do.
Secondly, we've heard the words culture a lot today, security culture, and this is something I've been studying the past few years, and I put some guidance on the security.gov.uk website called Improving Security Culture, which is my take on the whole thing. Go look it up. I think so many questions that we've asked and raised today, the answer is somewhere in what we consider security culture to be, how we operate it, the benefits and the drawbacks and what it actually takes to make it work. And there's so much in that. There's this culture within security teams, there's leadership security culture, there is how you approach this issue of, well, how do we provide the right technology for everyone so that they have the opportunity to be a meaningful part of security, but we're not asking things that's beyond their skills, capabilities or interest. All of that, I think, comes back to culture for me. So that's my kind of blend, is that we need to keep focused on this, keep talking about it, and keep explaining culture again and the nuts and bolts of what makes it up and how we can bring it together into a brilliant thing. We need to keep doing that more, I think.
So good, so good. I hope that as you have been listening to that, people have kind of got their own things that they are likely to take away. But maybe you would join me in thanking our panellists for representing our collective minds up here.